I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we're going back to our Microsoft Access playlist, and we're going to talk about how to calculate dates. And specifically, we're going to use the DateAdd function, the DateDiff function, and the DatePart function. And these three functions, which you can use either in expressions or in VBA, are very, very handy if you want to calculate dates on your forms or in your queries or just in your VBA code to do all kinds of different things. So without further ado, let's get to our date calculations in Microsoft Access. Okay, so this is a familiar file that you guys have seen a lot of, and it's got some example data here in a visit table that I created that had some sort of random visit information about some people. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how to use that date that's in there, and we're going to add some new fields in a query, say, and then eventually we're going to take that query and put it in a table so that we can do some more calculations. And in order to do that, we're going to grab our query design. You can just close that pop-up and then just drag on the table that you want. And I'm going to grab some fields here, and all the fields, and I'm going to create basically we're going to use the DateAdd function first. So we're going to add some days to the current date that's in our table, and we're going to do that. We'll call our field next year in our query, and we can use that DateAdd function, and we're going to put d in, lowercase d in for days, and we'll say 365, and then we're going to say the field we're adding it to is the visit date field, and that'll change on every row, of course. And so that's going to be kind of dynamic, and that's a neat way of doing the DateAdd. And so when I look at that one, you can see, here we go, if I add 365 days, I get January 15, 2021, and if I add on to the next row, then it's a different one. And that's sort of neat how DateAdd is so easy to use there. And in a similar fashion, if I wanted to say show the date from last year or last week or whatever, I could also use DateAdd and just put a negative number in. So I could say number of days minus 365 and then the date. And note that you can also use YYYY if you're putting in just 1 year ahead, which you can also do, and you can also do it by weeks, which you'll see as we move through this tutorial here. So there's our next year and last year, and we've calculated those using the DateAdd function. That was very handy, and you can see how quick it is to use those inside a query. Now it's a little bit different when you use them in a form, so pay attention until the end of the video where I'll show you how to use it in a form control, which is a little bit, tiny bit different, but you do use the same expression. And so what we'll do here is if I want to add 1 month, I can also do that just as a demonstration. So I can add 1 month just by using the M instead of the D, and that's going to give me 1 month ahead. So 0116 becomes 0216, and that one sort of works. Now pay attention, you can try it out yourself, for things like leap years, when it's, the 29th, I think it puts it on the 28th of the next month or something like that. So when you use the M, so just be aware of that, that there are some little gotchas in there for those kinds of dates. So if I go back to our next year calculation, I put a Y in there. You'll notice it actually breaks it, and it puts in the next day, and that's because it's the day of the year. So add 1 day of the year. So you have to be careful of that when you're creating your calculations. And so what we'll do is we'll go back and we're going to put in YY. So you need 4 Y's for it to do the year. And so if we do that, we'll change that over to YYYY, then that's going to give us the result that we want, and we can just say 1 year ahead. And it may or may not give the same number of days. You'll see this a bit later. It might be 1 day off of if you actually say 365. The same with quarters, because of the number of days that could be in a quarter if it's a leap year and stuff like that. But we can look at the same date in the next quarter, or like it's sort of close to 90 days, I think, for a quarter. And so if we say, give me the date in the next quarter that matches, which is useful for some scenarios, you can see there it'll give me April 16th for January 16th, and if I have a February 2nd, it gives me May 2nd, which is handy for some financial analysis. So just be aware that there is a quarter in there that you can use, which is quite handy. So I'll call this this query visit date add, and we can close that. And I guess I'll open it in design view. I could have just switched to design view there. And I'm going to change it to a make table query so that I have those dates that we calculated. Those are actually going to be in a destination date table that we can use for some other stuff. So I'm going to call it visit dates, and then I'll run it. And this is a make table query. So now you'll see there's a table called visit dates, and we can open that one and look at it, and it looks like the view that we had, but now it's actually a table. And that's very, very handy. So we just took a whole bunch of calculated dates that were in a query, and we put them into a table, which is going to be really good for other purposes if we wanted. So now if I wanted to, compare dates or look at the difference between dates, I can do that. I can look at that new table that we just created, and I'll grab some fields. I don't know, I'll grab a visitor and the visit date and maybe the next quarter or something like that. Just so that we have a couple of dates in our in our query here. And so now I can go ahead and I can calculate, make a calculation, and I'll call the field days, and I'll use the DateDiff function, and I'll use the lowercase d, and then I'll make the difference between the visit date and the next quarter, so that we can see, how many days did it calculate for the next quarter date. Was it strictly 90 days, or were there differences in the days? And so now that we have our days in there, we can go ahead and take a look, and you can see that actually when we calculated those, the next quarter date, it actually said, the same, or the next quarter date is, 91 days in this case, and then it looks like when there was, February was part of it, then it was 90 days, and so on and so forth. So just be aware that the number of days that gets calculated when you use the next quarter, or DateDiff with quarter, it's not always strictly 90 days, but it's sort of like a rough measure of what the corresponding day would be in the next quarter, I guess you'd say. So we could do the same thing. We could say the difference in quarters between the DateDiff that we have. So we can use the Q for quarter, and then we can choose a couple of fields. We'll say the visit date and say the next year date, and that'll allow us to see the calculation between that was made between those ones. So we can say what was the difference between those two calculations in terms of quarters. And so now we can see, it calculates 4 quarters between all of them because we calculated a full year. And we could actually go back that next year. We could put that into our output. I wanted to show you that you can select fields in your calculation that are not, that are from your table but not in the output. But there we go. There's our visit date and the next year date, and then that's 4 quarters that we calculated. And there's visit date and the next quarter, which was 91 days difference in that particular case. And so I'll go ahead and save that, and then we can move on to another example. I'll call it visit DateDiff, I guess, and I'll save that one. And so moving on, I can go ahead and create a new query here, and I'll just drag our visit dates onto there. And what we're going to do here is we're going to grab some fields, and then we're going to use the DatePart function. And the DatePart function is very, very handy for when you need to extract like the day from the date, or the month from the date, or the year from the date, and you can extract it in different formats, and it makes it very, very nice for if you have to concatenate together some weird date format that you can't do using format, or something like that, or if you just need to have all of those in different fields, which is very common, that databases store each of the values in different fields. And so we can say DatePart, and we can use the same notation, the D for day, and then we can put in our field name, and then it auto created our query field name. So we'll add our own field name. We'll just call it day, and there you can see we've extracted the day, which is 19, from the date. And so DatePart is very, very handy for that when you need to split out your days and things like that. And that's very common in data engineering, that you have to do that. So we could change it. We could ask for a different a different part of the date. We could ask, in this case we'll call our field month, and then we'll use DatePart, and we'll use M for month, and then we'll put in our visit or next date again, and then we can see what comes out of that. And as you can see now, if I run my query, it grabs the right month from the date that we specified there. So DatePart is very handy, and you'll end up using it quite a bit if you program in Microsoft Access, a fair amount. And just to show the year here, we're going to put our 4 Ys in, and then we'll put our next date in there. Just to say we wanted to have all 3 parts of the date split out, we could certainly do that, and now we've got them in our separate fields, and that's very handy. That's something that we definitely want to be able to do. And we could put a different date in there as well. If we wanted the date part of the visit date instead, we can grab it from there. That's sort of how DatePart works. So I'll go ahead, I'm going to save that query as well, and then we'll move on to some VBA so that you can see these functions working in VBA, because they work almost exactly the same as what you saw before, the same syntax and everything. So it's quite handy. So if I make a new here, subroutine, and I'll just call it show dates, something that we can just run, and then I'll go ahead and I'll actually add the date data type to our input variable there in our argument, and that's going to pass in a nice date that we can use to do calculations. And so I'll make DateAdd date as date, and I'll create long integer as our difference, because the DateDiff passes back an integer, and the DatePart actually passes back a variant, which can be which is generally an integer or long integer, but it can be a string. So if I go now, we've got our 3 variables that we can sort of calculate from, and I can say DateAdd date is equal to DateAdd, and as you can see, we're using the same syntax that we used in our query, so it's actually nice and easy, and it works between the two. And I can say, D, and then I'll add 23 days to DT in whatever we pass into this, and then I'll say our difference is equal to the DateDiff, and we'll put the date D for days in there again, and I'll put in our input date, and then the added date as the to compare, which we should get 23 back, and then I'll do our DatePart, and I'll just get say the month from our new DT added date, and then that's three variables that we loaded using each of the different functions, and then I'll just debug.print DT added date is equal to, or DT added date, and then comma, and then the difference, and then a comma, and then we'll do our date part. And so we should get something that shows all of those. I'll do a debug compile just to make sure there's nothing that's going to blow up there. And then we can call it in our immediate window here, since we're in a module, and I'll just say show dates, and I'll put a literal date in, which you surround using the hashtags, and I'll actually submit in a US style date. So 7/25 will be July 25th, and looks like I actually have another function called show dates in this database, so so I'll have to call it show dates 1, so it's not the same name as the other function. You don't need to worry about that, but they've changed the subroutine name or the subname, and now when I hit enter, you'll see we get our dates in there. So you can see it returns 2021-08-17, which is 23 days from July 25th. And if I add 23 from August, we get, you can see the same thing. If you see here, this is August 25th, and then it's passing back September 17th, which is 23 days from then. And the 9 is the month which is passed back, so that's the 09 in that same row. So if I put 12/25 in there, 2021, it jumps ahead 23 days into 2022, and that's sort of how those functions can work. So as you can see, it's nice and easy to use in VBA. We can use our 3 different types of date functions, and those are not all of the date functions, but those are 3 handy ones that you can use throughout your project. Now, what if I want to do it on a form? So you can also do it on a form. I've created this form you see here. I created for a previous example, and if I just open it in the form view, you can see it's got the same data, except there's my date and then some other information about that particular visit. And say we wanted to create a new field in there with some different dates in it. So we can do that. We'll try a couple different dates. So I'm just going to paste in a text field, or I'll create a text field in there. I cut the label, and I'm just going to put the label above it here, and then I'll just move my text field up, or my text box up here, and there we go. I'll try to resize that. I always have trouble grabbing these here, and then I'll call this next week, say, for example, and I can go ahead and set up my text box the way that I want to, and you can see it's unbound right now, which means that it sort of has no data, has no control source, and you can enter the control source in the property sheet, or you can enter it directly onto the control. And what we're going to do is we're going to put equal to DateAdd, and then we'll use our syntax that we saw both in the query and in the VBA, and this is how you can use it on a form. So when you use it in a form control, you need to make sure you put equals in an equal sign in front of it, and that's going to allow you to calculate that date. So now we're saying, hey, add 1 day to our add 1 day to our field. I guess our label isn't very good description there, but we'll say there's 2016, 2017, that was 1 day ahead, but that's not what we were looking for. And there's a gotcha here as well that we sort of saw before with the year, in that if we put in if we put in just a day, we can put 7 days ahead, and that'll give us a week. So that's what we want to see. There's 116 and 0123, so that's accurate. So that gives us a week ahead, which is what we want. But we may want to, put in the week itself. And there's a bit of a gotcha here, because if you put in just a W and a 1, that gives you the 1 weekday ahead. So you can see it's given us 116 and 117 for the next week, which is wrong. So when you use the week character, you need to put in the 2 W's for week, and then it'll calculate 1 week ahead for you. So there we go. It's 2020 0116, 2020 0123, and that's exactly what we wanted to see there. And that's how you use DateDiff, DateAdd, and DatePart for dates in Microsoft Access. Hope you enjoyed today's discussion on how to calculate dates in Microsoft Access. If you like what you saw today, please give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell when you see the bell. And if you have any questions or comments, put those in the comment section below. Have a great day, have a safe day, and I'll catch you next time.